I think there's a brighter future for theme park design now than there was 2 years ago, because what happened at Imagineering, right? Because a lot of people were let go due to the pandemic, right? And, I think they're out there now and they're able to push the medium forward, and competition always leads to better product for the people, right? So that's what I'm excited about, because there's going to be another Mystic Manor. Is it going to be at Disney? Is it going to be at Universal? Is it going to be at Ubisoft Land? Is it going to be at Six Flags? Who knows? But that's exciting to me.
That is Ethan Reed, who is back this time for an Imagineering Roundtable along with Joe Lanzisero. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks for joining me here on episode 155 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. Hope you're all doing awesome out there as you get ready for the holidays. I'm really excited to be back with another Imagineering Roundtable. These have been some of my favorite shows that I've done here on the podcast, and this one is no exception. Like I said in the intro, we've got Ethan Reed, we've got Joe Lanzisero, and they're talking about a lot of cool issues related to theme parks, including character animation. Both of them went to CalArts, studied character animation. Joe was an animator for Disney for quite a while. They talk all about attractions and animating characters, what makes good characters, how they fit, so much cool stuff. And I'm going to introduce both of them during the main interview. So all I'm going to say before we go to it is, if you have not checked them out, go back and listen to episode 140 with Ethan Reed. Awesome interview. He was so much fun. Talked about all the things he's worked on. And 3 episodes with Joe Lanzisero, episodes 75 and 95, where we talked about his career. And then he was on the first roundtable with Don Carson. It's so cool to have both of them back on the show. 2 of my favorite guests that I've had throughout the run of the Tomorrow Society podcast. So let's get right to it. Here are Ethan Reed and Joe Lanzisero. Welcome to another Imagineering Roundtable. I'm really excited about both guests here today. My first guest worked as a show animator, concept artist, and more at Walt Disney Imagineering for more than 22 years, beginning in 1998. His career has included work on attractions like Mystic Manor, Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, Ariel's Undersea Adventure, Monsters, Inc. attractions, Duffy and Friends, and a lot more. Currently a character artist at Just Play. It is Ethan Reed. Ethan, thank you so much for coming back to the podcast.
Oh, hey, Dan, it's great to see you. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, totally. I'm excited to talk with you more because I really enjoyed our last discussion about a lot of things you worked on. And then my second guest started at Disney as a feature animator in 1979, moved to Imagineering 8 years later, was the show producer for Mickey's Toontown, led the creative development for the Mermaid Lagoon and Arabian coastlands of Tokyo Disney Sea, led the team behind Mystic Manor, and then as a senior creative vice president, oversaw Disney Cruise Line plus the Tokyo and Hong Kong resorts. It is Joe Lanzisero. Joe, thanks for coming back for a 4th time on the podcast, if you can believe it.
No, really. That many. I guess I'm having a good time. Keep coming back for more.
Oh, yeah. It's always awesome to have you on the show. And Joe, I wanted to briefly ask you, too, because I've noticed that you started doing what's called a Zoomcast, Spirit of the Time, with Ryan Harmon. You've had some amazing guests on there. And I was just curious a little bit of how that got started and, what it involves.
There's a lot of great podcasts and Zoomcasts out there. A lot of them are by, people that are interested in the subject matter. but I don't know if there's very many like peer-to-peer kind of things going on. And both Ryan and I know and have worked with so many amazing people, some of them getting up there in age, some of them I feel like are unsung heroes. There's a lot of great people that did amazing things in the industry, but it always seems like the same 5 or 6 are the ones that you end up hearing on these podcasts and on the Disney Plus and those kinds of things. And we said, you know what, their story needs to be heard. And it needs to be heard through the lens of people that worked with them. So we're kind of sharing war stories in some ways. So it's been really great. And I've got to hear, even people like we had Gordon Hoops. Not very many people knew who Gordon Hoops was, but this guy had an amazing career at Disney. And he was actually one of the first people I got to work with at Imagineering when I was working on Splash Mountain for Tokyo. My first business trip to Tokyo was with Gordon. But it's great not only to exchange these stories, but to learn more about the things that they did. Disney has made so many parks and has made so many attractions. There's so many great people out there. So our mission is to make sure their stories are heard. And in some cases, setting the record straight too, because you're not always getting the straight story from the Imagineering story on Disney Plus and these other things.
Oh, yeah. That's the thing, too, because I'm aware of a lot of Imagineers and a few like you talk with, like Rick Rothschild and Tom Morris. But then there's others, like you mentioned, where I'll see a name and I'm like, I haven't heard that one as much. And it's someone who's done so much. So there's so many people out there, as I continue to learn, that worked on such important attractions and parts and lands and everything that aren't as well known. So it's awesome. Ethan.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention, you being a creator, maybe the creator of Duffy and Friends characters, that recently another character that you were involved with premiered, which is Lena Bell, which I'll admit, I don't know that much about, but I think it's cool that they just keep bringing out new characters that you were involved with. And I'd love to learn a little bit from you about the character because I don't know much.
Well, yeah. So, we've got Joe, and Joe is the guy who started the whole Duffy universe. So, so that's amazing. And, I didn't join Duffy and Friends team until after finished work on Mystic Manor. It was like almost immediately after I got off the plane from Hong Kong, finishing up Mystic Manor. I was whisked to a meeting with, Oriental Land Company. We're brainstorming new friends, and we came up with Gelatoni, Stella Lou, and Cookie Ann in those meetings. And they are all beloved by fans. People love them. Olu Mel. And then excitement just kept growing. And then Shanghai Disneyland, they wanted their own friends. So worked with the merchandise team in Shanghai, and we worked with all the partners sites, because we had this whole Duffy family, and it was a really fun group of people. And we just brainstormed and came up with a character that people really love. She's got this big fluffy tail, and she's a detective. Like, she's always looking for something new. And something I learned at CalArts was you can make a cute character, and you want these characters to be cute, but they need to have a personality, and they need to be different from each other. We don't want them to be completely interchangeable, right? So each friend that we develop, like Gelatoni is an artistic cat. Duffy wasn't artistic at all. He learned to see the world through an artist's eyes when he met Gelatoni. Same thing with Stella Lou. She's a dancer. She's not the best dancer, but she's always out there, practicing, trying, working on her craft. And then, Cookie Ann, she's a cook, she's a chef. And it's so funny because we were talking when we were developing this character that every single one of the new characters that we developed, including Olu Mel, he's a musician, they're all artistic, right? So Lena Bell is the first one who she's really smart. She's a detective. So she looks at things like introspectively, or, it's like she's the more logical of the friends, if that makes sense.
Ethan, I just got to say, I'm listening to you, and it joys me to hear you talk about, the process you guys went through, and that it's story-based, because there are a lot of, there's thousands of plush characters out there, and they're cute, and they're, they got the big eyes, and they're soft, and they're fun. But, and I think there's a certain level of appeal to those, but the fact that you build this whole universe of characters that is and I love the idea that you've expanded the universe, but has stayed true to the core story, that they're friends and that they're artistic, and that, that now Duffy sees the world through an artistic lens because of them. That's fantastic. And I think that gives so much more resonance to buying a toy that's just a cute thing. It's a cute thing that's connected to a bigger story and an individual story as well.
I think that leads well into kind of what we're going to talk about today, with a lot of the topics relating to character animation and what you have done, which is, bringing life to these characters and to these lands and attractions. And I know both of you studied character animation at CalArts and ultimately ended up working on theme park attractions. So I'll start with you, Joe. You ended up going to Imagineering a bit later after you'd been an animator, but what made Imagineering and working on attractions, how did that end up being such a good fit for you to work in that zone of theme parks?
I think I've told this story before. I might even told to you, in one of our past discussions. I think different personalities work better in different roles. Animation, at least the time when I was doing it, and as an animator, it's a very solitary experience. You would get your assignment from the director. You got your layout, and you got your X sheet that had the timing on it. Then you went back to your room, you closed the door, and then you would spend hours and hours animating the scene, then show it to the director. He'd give you notes. You go back to your room, hours and hours, making corrections or doing the next scene. So it's a very solitary experience. And some people find that very, very satisfying. And then at some point I got a taste of being able to sit in a story meeting, and I started doing some storyboards and doing some story development. And then I got to I became a directing animator, which was more, working with people. And I discovered I loved the experience and the energy you get from working with others. And Ethan will attest to this. Imagineering is a very, very collaborative place. And what you have to do in order to get those attractions built is work with a lot of different people, with a lot of different points of views, a lot of different disciplines, from writers, producers, model makers, character designers, and everybody brings a little something different to the table. So it really, it fit my personality better, that the act of working with others. And I think as I moved through the ranks, for me, it was easier to let go of having hands-on control of things. Like when you're an animator, you're controlling that little piece of that story or that movie. At first, when I started doing the show design as a show designer, I would get a little piece of the bigger project, but it was easy for me to let go because I enjoyed the process of working with people and knowing and really falling in love with the idea that there were people that were smarter and more talented than me, and that I could still influence. In fact, I could influence more by being able to work with people like Ethan, that I just felt 100% confident that, hey, Ethan, let's work on these characters for Mystic Manor. And wow, he would bring in the drawing and go, look at that. That's, that monkey is right on. That's just what we wanted. So long answer to your question, but I think for me, it was about my personality type. It fit what ultimately became a role at Imagineering that allowed me to work with others and enjoy that process of working with others.
So Ethan, why do you think, I don't know how you can follow that up, but I'm curious for you, what made Imagineering a good fit? Was it something similar? How did it work out for you where your skills, like Joe mentioned, ended up working out so well?
For me, it was, I thought I would, follow a path similar to Joe and start at feature animation. I was at CalArts and I wanted to do 2D animation, and I loved going to Disneyland. Like my wife and I, when we first came down to Southern California from San Francisco, we had annual passes to Disneyland, and we would go every weekend. And we would just I'd bring my sketchbook and I'd sit on a bench and I'd sketch people in the park, and I would just have a great time doing that, and just people watching. And then, go on Pirates of the Caribbean because it's like the best attraction ever made, right? So I would do all that stuff, and then I'd go back and I'd, up to, Valencia and work on my film at CalArts, and I was pretty happy. And then I was, almost immediately like, offered an internship to learn how to animate automatronic characters at Imagineering. So I thought I was going to have to like spend like 20 years at feature animation, like working my way up through the ranks. Mark Davis didn't, start at like Imagineering. He was like in his late 50s, I believe. Right. So, for me, I thought to get to Imagineering, you had to be like Mark Davis good. And I obviously am not. Right. But what happened was I got in, and it was because there was so much work happening because Tokyo Disney Sea, because there was Arabian Coast, and there was the Sinbad attraction, and there was hundreds of animatronic figures that needed to be animated. So I was brought in to learn how to animate those figures. And, when I was, the way that you were recruited into the show programming department back then is you had to do what was called the 3-day test. You had your demo reel, you had your portfolio. They looked at that, but then they basically threw you in the pool and said, can you figure out how to animate this humanoid animatronic? And that's what I did. And I took, we had this CD, and it was called Pieces of 8, and it had like 10-second clips of audio from like different park performances. So I took the Wicked Witch, because Wizard of Oz had just been released in the theater, and I love Wizard of Oz, right? Margaret Hamilton has such a great performance. So I just sat there and animated this 10-second piece of the Wicked Witch of the West, right? And that's how I got in. And I was still at CalArts, and I was going in 2 days a week to Imagineering. I quit my job at the Disney store, and Imagineering was paying me way more money. And I was like, I'm in I'm in the mothership. I'm in Imagineering. I was like so over the moon. And I thought it was just going to be a 12-week internship, right? But it turned into like 2,000 weeks or something like that. But I mean, it was fun. And, I got to animate, right? But I was animating these automatronics. And at the time that I was leaving CalArts, 2D animation was starting to really like not be as big as it was like when I decided to go to school, and CG animation, like computer animation with films like Toy Story, that really took off. So this was a new frontier of animation that, hadn't really, some people had explored it, right? But it needed more work. It still does, right? So I went down that path, had a lot of fun, did really cool figures, but show design and art directing, like all those things that Joe said, I can do a garbagey sketch, right? Hand it off to a sculptor, and they'll make it amazing. And if any of the sculptors I'm working with at my toy company hear that, they're like, yeah, we agree.
In other words, Ethan, you enjoy I think that Imagineering is a process. There's a process that happens there, and you have to understand the process and appreciate the process to thrive there. And you obviously did both, understood and appreciated.
That leads me well into, both of you talked about how you ended up in Imagineering and why that seemed to be good. But, having that background in animation, I'll ask you, Ethan, what about you mentioned going and sketching at Disneyland and all that. How do you think that may have made you a better theme park designer, or just benefited you when you went to try to figure out how to animate characters?
Well, it's like you see people it was one thing that I'd like to do. And I used to do this in San Francisco. I'd met when I worked at the Disney store. There was an animator, I don't remember his name, but he was there was lots of animators on Sleeping Beauty in the 1950s. And this guy who came into the store, he told me he worked, I was in the animation gallery. He told me, oh, I was an animator. So we got to talking, and he's like, oh, what you should do is when you're sitting on the train, like on Muni or whatever in San Francisco, take out your sketchbook and draw people as you're going by, right? Because you're going to get that quick read of what they're doing. And so this guy told me this, and when I'd go to Disneyland, I'd sit on the train. Most of the time there was a berm and stuff, but you'd get to Toontown Depot and things like that, or you'd go to, the train station at Disneyland, and you'd see people, and I would just do like a real quick, 30-second sketch, right? And you just get the essence of what you see the people doing. And that really did help for doing design for ride-through attractions, right? Because how's that pose going to read when you're going by in a moving vehicle, right? Is it going to be that strong silhouette? Is it going to be that fruitful moment where everything is happening?
I would say that was probably the main thing I took away from animation as well, is that there's 24 frames per second, and you have 1/24th of a second to, when you're coming up with a pose, and it has to tell a story. or at least convey a performance. You have to be able to think about, how does the character feel, by staging him this way, is it going to really show off his temperament, or that certain moment of storytelling, how that character feels. So you really have to think about, it has to read really quickly and has to read really strong, and it can't be ambiguous. So you take that same kind of thinking then and you apply it to when you're designing a ride, for the very reasons Ethan said, because in a movie theater, you have an audience that's sitting there and watching something on a screen. But in a ride, they're going by 2 feet a second, 3 feet a second, or faster. If it's a coaster like the Snow White Mine coaster that you worked on, Ethan. And so you really have to think about, the economy of storytelling, being able to quickly communicate an idea and make sure that it works with the bigger story and that it's not ambiguous, so people know exactly what that character is doing, how that character is feeling, what that character is thinking, and how it works in the larger context of the whole ride experience that you're working on.
How do you boil that down? Because I think about the best examples, like you think Snow White, but then there's other examples. I mean, I'm not picking on any attractions in particular, where you go by and you're like, I think I saw something. It went by. I'm not trying to ask you just to like go through your whole process, but I'm just curious, like what is like a factor that allows that feeling and emotion to really come out when you're doing something like that?
Part of it is like enjoying theme parks and like going on attractions and knowing that if you're going in a ride vehicle and you're going straight ahead, the last thing you want to do is crane your neck and look over your shoulder, right? That is not comfortable. That's not a good guest experience. And, I've seen some shows where they'll put a character over there. And if it's like, when we did Monsters for, California Adventure, Robert Coltrane, who, we both love and worked with for years, right?
Another one of those unsung heroes, by the way.
He is a Disney legend, though. They did make him a Disney legend, finally.
As they should have.
But anyhow, when he laid out that attraction, he had to fit everything into the old Superstar Limo show building, right? So he was limited. So like where Smitty and Needleman are, it is a look back, right? But we didn't put any functions in them because we knew it was going to be a look back. But, Chris Runco and I, when we were working on it, we put a portrait of Waternoose on the wall because Waternoose didn't appear in the attraction at all. And we're like, and when you're riding through, it's like, okay, I'm going to look at these guys, but something has to be on this big blank wall that we're staring at when the door opens. So we contacted Pete Docter, like, hey, Pete, can you send us that file from, the Monsters film? And he did. And we had a friend, print it up, and Jody McLaughlin, our producer, put it in a frame. We went out there with, drills and just drilled it into the wall, right? That's Imagineering. And that's the type of stuff that I love. And, so I think for the most part, nowadays you have like, virtual ride throughs. Like, so when we were doing Mystic Manor, I would do quick sketches. Joe would do quick sketches of staging of these characters, but we got to look at it in the dish, right, at Imagineering, and pre-visualize the whole thing and make sure that the decisions we were making on the poses, on the characters, was correct before we were on the site.
And in that one, it was particularly important because it wasn't a known IP. It wasn't based on a movie, but we were trying to tell a movie-like story, that had a beginning, middle, and end. And kind of the character arc of the monkey was really, went from, he was curious, he discovered, that he opened up this box, and then the effect that box and the music dust had on him and everything in the mansion. And you had to see him go through this change of going from just kind of this amused little monkey, to, oh my gosh, this thing's out of control. I'm in danger. I'm going to get killed. And then I got to stop this thing, and then redeem himself at the end. I mean, that's a pretty complex arc of emotions. And, Ethan did an amazing job, of staging him, coming up with different poses, in each of the scenes. So you knew exactly, well, in this scene, he's curious, he just popped out of the organ and he's looking around, and now, okay, he's just poking at this big, plant monster, but he doesn't realize that the mom's ready to eat him, and so as it progresses, you're, and we always talked how the monkey was kind of our surrogate, we were kind of being faced with all these perils and getting close to being caught in the perils, but the monkey was the one that was actually experiencing them. And because monkeys are so human-like, it was easy to translate those emotions to ourselves. We could see, oh my gosh, that could be me, but it's the monkey. So it was really kind of a complex level of things that were going on, but all going back to what we learned in animation about understanding the character, who the character is, what he's going through, and then making sure he's staged in a way that's clearly communicated to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, with Mystic Manor, I would love to know too, because you mentioned it, Joe, that these are original characters, Lord Alfred Mystic and Albert, and to me, they stand out so well and they're so memorable. But I know that, it may be more challenging. You have to do a lot of the things you mentioned, Joe, and introduce them and explain what they are. But is that also kind of freeing where you don't have all that story? You're doing more creating something. I don't know, Ethan, for you, I mean, did you find that not having that IP, or how did that end up working out where you're doing something that for the time was fairly rare?
It's funny because I had, talked about working on Monsters Incorporated and for DCA. And that was the first time that I'd been asked to do any art direction. So I art directed all the characters, and it was a very different, Disney had not purchased Pixar yet. It was kind of loose, and, I could just call up Pete Docter's office and, he would pick up the phone. It was really cool. Right. And then, of course, it gets bigger and bigger. And then, you have to go through more people and all that stuff. And, I went from working on Monsters for California Adventure. Then I started working with Joe on Monsters for Tokyo. And then I started doing development on Mr. Potato Head. And then I was, doing stuff for the other Pixar thing, Cars Land. I had started I had started doing like sketches for like Mater, and how are we going to do Mater's mouth, and figuring out how he's going to drive backwards, all that stuff. I was working on all this stuff, and it was funny because being from the Bay Area, it's like I knew exactly what Pixar was. I hung out at Pixar when they were making the first Toy Story, and it's like, I felt like I worked at Imagineering. I feel like I'm working at Pixar, right? And I love Pixar, right? But it's like, it was just like Pixar, IP, Pixar IP, Pixar IP, Pixar IP. And then here comes, Robert Coltrane and, Joe Lanzisero, and they're like, hey, we've got a brand new IP. In fact, we've got two. We've got Grizzly Gulch too. I'm like, I want to be on that. So I remember talking to my supervisor, and I'm just like, hey, I don't want to be on Cars Land. I want to be on Mystic Manor and Grizzly Gulch, because we're developing something new. And as an artist, I had to have a lot more freedom, right? It's like I wasn't following exactly what was done in the film, which is fun and is a challenge. And, I found joy in it every time I worked on, an IP, right? But, with like a CG IP like Monsters, it's like, especially today, it's like, well, you can just take the digital data, right? You can take the Mr. Incredible sculpt, have an animator pose it, and like, oh, look, there it is. With something like Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, it's like, okay, it was all 2D animation. And like, you look at the model sheets from the 30s, and it's like, they're not necessarily drawn the most solidly and stuff like that. So you had to go in and do a little design and, update some things here and there and work with the sculptor. So that was fun. But yeah, just being able to develop green grass, like, open field, that's what it was on Mystic. And it was just so much fun.
It really shows in the attraction, the fact that you were able to do that. Well, that kind of leads well into another question I'll have for you, Joe, which is, both of you have been involved. You mentioned a lot of them so far in just some of the really classic characters for theme parks, whether they're originals or even they translate well from IPs to a theme park. So what makes a great character like at a theme park, Joe? I mean, because it doesn't always matter if they're original or not. It's just how do they work at an attraction, and it can vary a lot.
Whether it's an established IP, characters that or whether it's something that we created, like the characters for Mystic and for Grizzly and other things, it has to connect with the audience emotionally. You have to feel something about the character. I mean, there's a lot of dark rides and even a lot of other attractions out there where, it's obvious that the people that design them, and there are even some things in some Disney parks, some current stuff, where I don't feel emotionally connected to the experience, and I don't feel emotionally connected to the characters. And the characters are your best device for emotionally connecting people to an experience. I mean, if it's a cool environment, you can feel moved when if it's very grand or if it's dark or if it's really bright. I mean, there's certain emotions that you have when you're in certain spaces too. But in terms of really connecting you emotionally to the experience, nothing does it like a character, and understanding that even like when you're working with an established IP, making sure that you've chosen the right moment from that IP. Like when we were doing Monsters, making sure Boo was always engaged in something that you felt like either she was in peril or she was doing something cute, and then you immediately connected with her. Also, you had to realize too that when you had an established IP, that not everybody came in with a complete understanding of that IP. So I always tried to approach things as like, I still had to think about that character. Like if the guest didn't know who it was, you still had to communicate how they felt or the way they were, by the way they were staged or the way you lit the scene, so that the audience had a clue or a cue as to, how am I supposed to feel about what I'm seeing. So for me, that was always key, finding how do I make sure that the audience is emotionally connected to this character or to this scene.
And another thing too is, and I'll kind of lead this to you, Ethan, but is that we've talked about how sometimes you only have a few seconds or not very much time. So you have to make it really big. So like something like exaggerating or caricature or something. So, I mean, how do you go about doing that where it's big enough? Because I could see something where it doesn't seem like it has to be that big, but if it's not, people will just blitz right by it. How do you go about doing that?
One of my favorite mentors would always tell me, keep it simple, right? He'd always say KISS method. And his name was Joe Lanzisero, right? And I do remember we were working on Sinbad, like when we added the Shandu character into the Sinbad attraction.
I'd forgotten about that, Ethan.
Yeah, no, and people love Shandu. I mean, it's like Shandu is a very popular character.
And also a good example of he was a device that created emotional connection.
Correct. Yeah. And then also having the music, right? Because music, it always brings us back to, it's emotion, right? And what happened I just remember walking through the Sinbad attraction. It was drained, right? We were reviewing animation, and Joe and myself and John Kutry, another animator, we're standing by the Sultan and Sinbad in the India scene, right? And like the Sultan or whatever, he had this giant crown and all this stuff. And I remember Joe saying, see, you make things really big so it reads. And it was just like, because I had animated that character before in the previous version. He had just a little turban or whatever and a little tiny gem. And you're like, okay, he looks important-ish, right? But Joe was right. You bling it out, make it really big and obvious. You're not going to miss it, right? So that one like bit of review that Joe gave has always stuck in my head.
That's a perfect example, because I think about big moments. You mentioned even the Wicked Witch of the West, where that when she appears in Great Movie Ride, it's like whoa. But how do you avoid going too far with that, though? Where like you don't want to feel like you're attacking the guest. I mean, what's kind of the middle ground there? How do you find that, Joe? Like where you don't feel like you're going too much into it, or can you go too far? Is it just it's always good to be big?
I think it's always dictated by the moment, by the story moment. That I hate to continue to use Mystic, but I think because that was something that we created. The moment in the second to last scene where the monkey is trying to regain control and the wall blows out. I mean, that was a big moment. You're caught in this kind of tornado of the room spinning around. The wall blows out. The monkey is trying to grab at the music box and get it back under control. So I think it's all about what the story needs at any given point, and trying to push it as much as you can. So in that case, it was a super dramatic moment. You really want, and the monkey was in peril. You're in peril. Basically what we were trying to say is that the magic had gotten so out of control that it was destroying the mansion, and that he had to kind of pull it all pull it all back together. So I answer your question. If it's appropriate for the story and for the moment, I don't think you can go too far.
Can you overdo something? You can't over animate, right? You can like make something overly cartoony, like if it's not supposed to be. Like, I enjoyed animating characters like Sinbad and the monsters characters, cartoon characters. That's what I enjoyed animating. Hall of Presidents, Abraham. I enjoyed, because I'm a fan, I enjoyed getting to do it. My dad has great memories of watching, Lincoln at the World's Fair in the 1960s with my grandparents. And so it was an emotional thing for me to get to work on that. But, I animated Lincoln, when they did the Road to Gettysburg show, right? When, people got haircuts and stuff. And that was my first time animating Lincoln. I'm like, okay, that was fun. I didn't need to do it again. But then 6 months later, I'm in Florida reanimating, Lincoln for the Hall of Presidents. I'm like, okay, I've done this twice now. And then I did it again in 2009. And we were really, I was working, with R&D. We were really trying to push realism and stuff like that. And it started getting this weird uncanny valley thing, right? And, and me naturally as a, cartoony character animator, I'm like, I want to have arcs on every single thing. And I want to blink the eyes before, it's like, I'm going to put in all those little tricks that I learned in animation school on these characters. But then when you do it on a realistic humanoid like Abraham Lincoln, he starts to look like a cartoon character. So I'd find myself doing my first passive animation on something like Lincoln. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to take those blinks out. I'm going to take that arc out. And I would just I'd have one version, which was all super, cartoony animation. And then I had to pull it back. And because you're basically rotoscoping, right? So for me as an animator, if I'm going to do a humanoid performance like that, just put somebody in a motion capture suit. I mean, let's be honest. Walt Disney invented motion capture for audiometronics with Will Rogers in the 1960s.
That's right.
Right? So it's Walt said to do it that way. So they should do it that way.
Yeah, Ethan, you bring up a good point about that, the uncanny valley. I think in the case of some characters, like the presidents, because everybody knows these are based on real people. But then I've seen some other applications where human characters, they do a human character, and I've had to ask myself, well, why did they chose to take a human character where it could have been something more fantastic? And I think there are advantages to keeping things more caricatured, especially if it's in a ride. As Ethan was describing, and I've been talking about, you're going through these things quickly, and you need to be able to have that character's story point, pose, read quickly, and when it's a human character, it's often as Ethan said, it can come off kind of insincere looking, or not authentic because you've had to exaggerate it a bit. But the cartoon characters are always great because you could always take them and put them in the most extreme pose possible. Like in the monsters attraction in Tokyo, the one scene where I think it's Mike is getting stretched, and we actually had his arms rubber 8 times longer than they would normally be. I was like, oh, that's fun. You can do that because it's a cartoon character.
That's a great example. I hadn't thought about just the difference in terms of a Hall of Presidents or something where they have to stand very still. But I'm curious too. I mean, both of you have mentioned plenty of great attractions involving characters, but is there, I'll ask you, Ethan, is there another theme park attraction or others from any Disney, Universal, wherever that really use their characters effectively, that have memorable characters?
I think it's the most recent attraction I've been on, and it won the FIA award for attraction of the year, was the Secret Life of Pets at Universal in Hollywood. And it's a really fun show. It actually reminds me a lot of Monsters in Tokyo. You're going down the city street and there's just fun gags happening everywhere. Really great queue. I really felt that those characters were done well, and it was intimate. When I think of our reach envelopes and stuff, on every attraction there's a reach envelope, which means a 6'5" guy like myself can't reach his arm out of the vehicle with an umbrella and hit something, right? So you have to put everything so far away. So when you have a bit larger vehicle, that reach envelope just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you feel like you're going through Costco, right? And what I liked about this Secret Life of Pets attraction is it was like a 2-seater, and there's like it's a little box that you're in, and stuff is so close to you. And I mean, it's up the ride track is upstairs, the queue's downstairs. You go upstairs, and then you get in this cute little box, and it's a really well done attraction.
Wow, I have to go see it. I haven't seen it yet, but everything I have seen of it, I did the virtual ride through. I would say, yeah, it's really, really good staging of the characters, and and again, those characters are so caricatured too. I'm sure they had, and it looked like they'd taken advantage of really understanding how to pose them. But I'm trying to think of. I like the way. And it's a coaster, Hagrid's coaster down at Isles of Adventure in Orlando. There's not a lot of characters in there, but I felt like it was a good use of characters to help tell that story, and especially on a coaster. And they're really well-paced coaster because they were able to stop it, let you have a little character moment, and then send you on. So I think that's a good example of something that's out there right now. And I think they did a good job on.
Yeah, I think those are both great examples. And the Secret Life of Pets, it's too bad because, when it opened, it's one of those that I haven't seen. Like you mentioned, Joe, you haven't seen. And a lot of people probably haven't because, with the pandemic and everything, it just hasn't gotten the attention. Well, now winning an award, that's great. And then Hagrid's, of course. Yeah, I mean, I love the idea that they're taking physical sets and putting it in like with a coaster, which we've seen that before. Not as much from Universal, and I think, and same with Secret Life of Pets. I mean, it's great that they are doing this kind of really intimate dark ride, which they're trying to do some things that they weren't doing as much in the past, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think both those are great examples of them kind of making a conscious shift to get away from putting people in front of a screen and shaking them and then moving them to another screen and shaking them, which was kind of the hallmark of a lot of Universal attractions. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. It was just what it is. So it's not, and I think because, video is becoming ubiquitous. It's everywhere. We all have one of these things in our pocket and we can watch movies on it. And, there's TV screens and in supermarkets. When you pump gasoline, there's a video screen in front of you.
I hate that.
So,
Me too.
Yeah. So you're not kidding anybody when you put them in front of a screen on a ride, and just there's something. I mean, it goes back to Pirates, and I think it speaks to why Pirates is still to this day kind of the high watermark in a ride through attraction, because you're in this complete immersive theatrical world that's all real. That's real stuff everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. It's still, you mentioned characters, all the different characters that we spend a short time with, and you don't notice, and all of a sudden you're like, what is that guy doing? I haven't seen him before, and it's everywhere in that ride. It's wonderful. Well, speaking of just how things are going and looking at the future, I want to make sure we have time to talk about this. So I'll ask you first, Joe. Looking ahead, what are you excited about with theme parks, like developments? It could be technology, it could be how rides are going, parks, wherever. I'm just curious for you, what kind of gets you excited about where theme parks are going in the next few years and even past that?
I think I'm more excited about what's happening in the bigger industry with immersive experiences. There's a lot of stuff out there, some of it good, some of it not so good. A lot of these, projected artist experiences, I don't think are all that great. But then things like what Meow Wolf is doing, what Dreamscape is doing with VR, and I think it's good. I like seeing all these kind of interesting things being done on the outside, and I think they're going to influence the theme park. All those things were influenced by the theme park. So it's exciting to think about this back and forth that's happening between, all these interesting smaller things that are out there, and then what the big guys are doing. I haven't ridden the Mickey's Runaway train. Again, I've just seen it on video, and it looks really interesting because they put you physically in a real cartoon world. And again, that's a kind of a combination of a lot of the things that, this projection technology and immersive sets that have projection mapping on them. So it's all really interesting to me, and it'll be great to see where it all goes. I just hope that it all goes in an area that allows people to continue to be emotionally moved by it in a positive way. I think we have a responsibility in this kind of crazy negative world we live in. And I think especially after COVID, I think our jobs is to entertain people and to elevate them for a moment, to take them out of their daily drudgery and give them a moment where they can forget about all that. And I think that's important for the designers not to lose track of that. And I think, a lot of the superhero stuff and the Star Wars stuff, I think it's interesting. But I think we're in a world, I think, that needs. That's why I'm glad they're doing things like The Secret Life of Pets. And of course that kind of stuff appeals to me too. And I'm not saying the other stuff doesn't have a place, but I just like to see more uplifting and more positive experiences being created. And hopefully I can do some more of that. But we'll see.
I'm totally with you. I totally agree. I think that's a great point. So, Ethan, what excites you about what's coming in the near or far future?
Now that I'm designing toys full time now, I mean, theme parks are just like fun again, right? That's not the job, right? So I can go back to just being a theme park fan. And so I love that. And, have not checked out Meow Wolf. Very interested in that. So many friends have gone to Meow Wolf, and I've only heard great things about it. But Secret Life of Pets, great. The Mario thing that they did in Osaka, I mean, I'm a huge, I grew up playing Super Mario Brothers. My kids like Super Mario more than they like Mickey Mouse because that's what they grew up with. So I think this next generation of kids, or the people who are my kids' age, right? They're going to gravitate towards video game experiences. So I know at IAPA, they just announced the Ubisoft, theme park with, I guess, Storyland Studios is working on. So that's pretty exciting. I think Jim Clark is working on that. One of, your other guests, close friend of mine.
Yeah. So
I'm very excited about what's going on with that. And I think, the pandemic has we've all learned how to do things differently. I mean, Zoom calls, all that stuff. It's nice to just get out into theme parks. It's nice to get out into public spaces around other people that are, hopefully vaccinated. And, so I think there's a brighter future for theme park design now than there was 2 years ago because what happened at Imagineering, right? Because a lot of people were let go due to the pandemic, right? And, I think they're out there now and they're able to push the medium forward, and competition always leads to better product for the people, right? So that's what I'm excited about, because there's going to be another Mystic Manor. Is it going to be at Disney? Is it going to be at Universal? Is it going to be at Ubisoft Land? Is it going to be at Six Flags? Who knows? But that's exciting to me.
That's very generous thinking on your part. Yeah, I agree.
I agree too. I mean, I think about the IAPA announcements and things that excited me, and some of them there was something in Iowa and in Monterey Bay, and then there's a coaster in Georgia. It's not just, okay, I'm excited about Guardians of the Galaxy or, Tron, but there's all these other ones where I'm like, oh, that's only 5 hours for me, or that's only a 2-hour flight or whatever. I think it's great. So both of your answers, I'm on board with them. I give them thumbs up. Well, great. Well, this has been awesome. I could do this forever, but I would love to know from you, if people want to follow Joe, starting with you. You've been posting some really great stuff on Instagram. I start reading them and then minutes have gone by and I'm not sure where they went, but I've really been enjoying that. So anywhere where people can follow you or anything you're working on, I would love to know about it.
Just follow me on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I post on Facebook. It's funny because I was never a big social media guy, and I've kind of discovered that it's a good way, again, kind of to set the story straight on a lot of things that I'm at a point in my career now where I'm thinking a little bit about my legacy and, making sure I can, again, I watch these Disney Plus things with, the Imagineering story and the behind the scenes things, and they're not always 100% accurate, and they're not always giving the credit where credit is due. That's why I'm doing this Zoomcast, and that's that kind of dragged me into this social media thing, just so I have a platform to kind of get my story out there.
Well, I'm glad you're out there doing that to tell the story, and just it's great information. Well, Ethan, welcome back to the theme park fan group, now that, but I'm glad to have you. But anything, I know you also post some cool stuff, but anywhere you're out there, I'd love for people to know about.
Yeah, I'm definitely on Instagram under ethan.f.reed. And, I during the furlough, during the pandemic, I would do a drawing a day. I can't do that because I have a full-time job now. So I try and post something once a week. I try. And, it is great. Fans will send me notes and stuff. I try to answer them. I really do. I learned that from Marty Sklar, right? He would always handwrite notes, and I don't have a red marker or like a cool paper like Marty did, but, I do have an iPhone. So I will do my best to chat with, say thank you or whatever. But, it's cool to interact with fans. I mean, I got to go to Paris. The first time I got to go to Paris, it was a Duffy summit. It was a Duffy thing. It was like a Duffy event. So Charlie Watanabe, one of our key writer, and Daniel Ju, who runs the Tokyo portfolio, the three of us went out there, and I met some really great guests. And there's like this one guy in Paris, and he like goes everywhere with his Duffy, and he's just the best, right? And he'll send me little notes here and there. I'm like, yeah, that's great, and it's super cool. And I just love connecting with guests. And Duffy, and which Joe and Scott Hennessy developed, and all the Gelatoni, all the friends I developed with Charlie and stuff. Those characters like really hit people emotionally. Like they love them. They're like their own children, and and that's really special, right? So I'm just happy that the work that I've done at my time at Disney, and the work that I'm continuing to do at my new company, Just Play, that's going to just bring joy to people. And that's what I'm here for. I just want to make people happy. Right. So
we are the most fortunate of human beings, Ethan, that we get to, our job gets to make people happy, and we should never lose sight of that. What a privilege that is, and a responsibility. And I think that you don't take it lightly, and I never took it lightly, and I still don't take it lightly.
Well, awesome. Well, both of you, Ethan, thanks so much for coming back. This was great to talk with you once again.
Awesome. Thank you.
And Joe, thanks again. It's always great to have you. And I really appreciate both of you being on the roundtable.
And it was great to be here with Ethan. Like I always said, I always stood on the shoulders of giants, and Ethan was one of those giants' shoulders that I climbed up on.
I was the tallest guy at Imagineering for a while.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I always love those roundtables. They're so much fun. I'd love to hear what you think of this show. And if you like the roundtable format, shoot me an email at dan@tomorrowsociety.com. You can also send me a message or follow me on Twitter, TomorrowSOC, Facebook, Instagram at Tomorrow Society. The Tomorrow Society podcast is made possible through the support of the members of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon. If you'd like to learn how to help out the show and get access to some really cool perks, go to patreon.com/Tomorrow Society. I really appreciate all the support, and it really makes a difference in keeping the show going and moving forward and getting to talk to amazing people like Ethan and Joe. Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookie, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time your ideas have been submitted, I'll be talking about my thoughts and yours on improving Dinoland USA at Disney's Animal Kingdom, and that will be here in 1 week. So soon. I can't wait. Don't forget to get your boosters for the vaccine. It helps us all, allows us to go to the parks, and it's just really appreciated to help keep everyone moving forward. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you again next time.